Good afternoon, students. Now I come back with the second part of my lecture, and in this part I shall be precisely talking about the prose style of John Donne with reference to the brief sermon which we call for our purpose an essay known as or entitled Death's Duel. Now, some of the points that I shall be mentioning today may be a repetition of the points that I made in my earlier lecture. What I want to do today is to make a detailed discussion of the various aspects of Donne's prose, Donne's style of presentation, and his arrangement of thoughts in the prose sermon. I remember that I mentioned to you Donne's use of analogy and parallels. And I shall start today with that point. Analogy and parallel are the two most important aspects of Donne's style. He begins the sermon with an analogy, the analogy of the building, and in connection with his discussion of the building, he mentions the structure, the beauty, and the configuration of the building, the symmetry of the building. And he points out that everything depends on the foundation. If the foundation is solid, the building, with all its beauty and symmetry, will stand and stay. If the foundation is weak, the building will collapse. Now, building actually is an analogy. Building is the human body. What he suggests by building is the structure of the human body. The human body is like a building with its many parts, with its patterns and configurations, and the body will collapse if the foundation refuses, or if the foundation becomes unable to hold it together. Now, what is the foundation of life? The foundation of the building is different. And, well, many things are connected. The way the bricks are arranged, the way the building materials were used and applied, etc., etc. But what is the foundation of the human body? That Donne says that the foundation of the human body is God. God is the foundation of our life. So, for both our life and our death, God is responsible. Now, I told you this in my last class also. I remind you once again that Donne follows a pattern in arranging, framing his sermons. A simple pattern which begins with introduction. First the introduction, then comes the statement of the case, and finally comes the conclusion. Now, here in this sermon, what is the introduction? The introduction is started, or rather the introduction begins with an analogy. The analogy of the building. The building which refers to the human body. Now we have to remember that, well, the main topic of discussion is death. Death. Death means the destruction of the body. So to make us realize the whole thing, Donne has used this comparison. When will the building collapse? How much time will be needed for the building to get destroyed? Well, the foundation of the building, how solid the foundation of the building is, on that everything depends. Now, human body depends on different ingredients, but all these ingredients are supplied and arranged by God. For a building, we need the workers, we need the masons, we need the laborers looking after various aspects of the building. But for the human body, the only mechanic, the only artist, the only artisan is God. So, what is our foundation? God. God, as I said, once again I repeat, God is the foundation of our life, and God is the foundation of our death. And the human body is the building here. And the human body is given its strength by God. Both the temporal and the spiritual, in both the temporal and the spiritual meaning, the strength is given by God. It is from God that we get the salvation, and therefore death can never give us any panic, or rather we need not be panicked by death, because God stands as our foundation. Both in life and in death, this body is connected with God. God is life and God is death. This is the introduction. And then comes the statement of the case. What is the statement of the case? In the statement of the case, well, Donne takes up the principal issue. What is the principal issue? Death. What is death? And death is discussed by Donne in the second part in various ways. Now, what is death? Donne uses a Latin phrase. This Latin phrase, you can get that from the text, exitus mortis. Exitus mortis, which means exit by death. If our human body is our existence, then we make our exit through death. So exitus mortis. But what is this exitus mortis? This exitus mortis, in fact, is a kind of liberation. Liberation. So death is also a kind of liberation. And God is the center and arbiter of all things. And therefore, life comes from God, and life terminates. When life terminates, it goes and moves into God. So for our beginning, we depend on God, and during our end, we depend on God. So when God is there at the back, there can be no reason for any fear. Life comes from God, life ends, and life is taken care of by God. Because, well, even after the collapse or the dissolution or the extinction of our human body, soul remains, and soul is looked after by God. Therefore, there is no fear. Death can pose and cannot pose any fear for us, because our foundation is God. Donne then takes up another very important point and says, well, this is also a kind of an analogy. He says that our entrance or our entry into life and our departure from life are somewhat similar. How? Because we come to this earth from the womb of the mother, and when we stay in the womb of the mother, we are in a darkness. We are in a state of darkness. From darkness, we move into light. So darkness, if darkness is compared with death, you can say that, well, in the womb, we live a different kind of life. Life in darkness. So from this life in darkness, we move into life in light. And then when we die, we move into life in darkness again. So darkness, light, darkness again. And this is the circle which our human life follows. And death and life are knit together by God. So death cannot be a matter of fear because it is a part of life. Another Latin phrase Donne uses, libertas per mortem, libertas per mortem, which means deliverance into death. So when you come from the mother's womb, that is deliverance into life. After death, it is a deliverance into death. So both life and death, both of them can be described as kind of deliverance. Now, God is there, and we may expect something good out of everything, because everything is finally and ultimately manipulated, controlled, looked after by God. As once again, Donne brings in an analogy of the death of Jesus. Jesus Christ died because out of this death something great came. And if you know, perhaps you have read your Paradise Lost, you all know, one better man restore and regain that blissful seat. So the first blunder, the first crime that man committed, of man's first disobedience and the fruit of the mortal tree, and the loss of Eden, and all our woe after the loss of Eden, till one greater man restore and regain that blissful seat. One greater man is Jesus Christ. And how did he do that? By giving his life, by embracing death. He earned liberty for the humankind. This is believed by the Christians, and this is the biblical truth. The death of Jesus Christ brought for us deliverance. And our poet or writer Donne says that everything has something good out of it. Every death has something good out of it, as the death of Jesus brought something good out of it. And thus he concludes that death should not be looked up as a thing to be afraid of. So you see the introduction, the statement of the case, and the conclusion. Well, in this pattern he frames the essay or the sermon, and we can say that, well, he uses a syllogistic pattern. What is syllogism? In syllogism we have a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. Now, what is a syllogism? Well, I can give you an example. Men are mortal. Such and such is a man. Therefore, such and such is mortal. This is the syllogistic pattern. God is our foundation. Both life and death are controlled by God. Therefore, death cannot be a fearful object. This is the syllogistic pattern that Donne has used. Throughout the essay or throughout the sermon, we have definite proofs of Donne's great scholarship. He was a Latin scholar, and his formidable knowledge and understanding of the Holy Bible is obvious here. Well, I have pointed out a few Latin phrases, Latin words and phrases very naturally came to him as he composed this. And Well, I told you this earlier also, and once again I point out that death is a very common subject in Donne. In many of his poems, he uses death, or he refers to death, and I shall be mentioning a few poems like Apparition. You can go and look up Apparition, point number 1. Poem number 2, Death, Be Not Proud. And poem number 3, A Nocturnal upon St. Lucy's Day. So these are the 3 poems. Well, many other poems are there where death is taken up as a subject, or death is referred to in the course of the poem. Now, well, some special sermons, some special sentences we may mention here in this sermon, and well, all these are taken from the Holy Bible. For example, well, we can take up 3 at least. You can check up the text. You should find it there. So, example number 1: eyes see not, ears hear not. And this he has taken from Jeremiah section 5 of the Bible. And another example I give you: I am wonderfully and fearfully made. I am wonderfully and fearfully made. So this is from Psalm number 139. And the third one is this: thy hands have made me. Thy hands have made and fashioned me. Thy hands have made and fashioned me. This is from Psalm 119. So, well, as I said, that biblical references are profuse, Latin phrases are there, and finally, well, I shall be pointing out a particular sentence which is very significant, where he says, living death of the body, living death of the body, living death of the body. What does it mean? Perhaps Donne means that death is something which is embedded in our body. Death is nothing which comes from elsewhere. Death is there in our body itself. So, the moment we are born, death is with us always. It will take hold of us only in proper time. But do not be afraid of death, because our foundation is God, and death is a kind of a deliverance. Now, I shall be just giving you a kind of a graph, if you kindly listen to me carefully. Now, we begin with building. Building is something connected with configuration, balance and beauty. So, from building we come to body. So, from building to body, body and soul are interconnected. From body we come to death, and with death there are certain things related. One is darkness, the other is and is also a kind of a dark place. So with death, 2 things are connected. One is of the mother, which is like the death, like a state of death, like a state of death to the fetus, and then darkness, of the grave, the darkness of the womb and the darkness of the grave. And then building, body, death, all the three are connected with deliverance, freedom. What is freedom? Does it mean freedom from bondage? Well, the word freedom perhaps doesn't have no meaning. Now, actually, Donne was a great philosopher, and well, his delineation of the subject of death is definitely very philosophical, and at times I feel that it has a similarity with Indian philosophy. In Indian philosophy, we also speak of the same thing. Death is nothing but a natural end, and there is nothing to be afraid of in death. So, I was talking of deliverance. What is deliverance? Well, perhaps, as I said, deliverance is a meaningless word, because there can be no deliverance. Well, there is always a bondage. It can be this, that from one bondage to another bondage. And if you care to read a poem by Rabindranath Tagore, I'll just recite 2 lines. Well, বৈরাগ্য সাধনে মুক্তি সে আমার নয়, অসংখ্য বন্ধন মাঝে মহানন্দময়, লোভিব মুক্তির স্বাদ. So what is mukti? Mukti means deliverance, and bandhan means bondage. So what is mukti? What is deliverance? Well, deliverance means another kind of a bondage. So there is no deliverance. So, well, when we are born, that is also a kind of a bondage. Our soul is in a bondage within the body, and when we die, well, that can be called a kind of a deliverance. But no, that will be also another phase of existence. Maybe we can connect Donne with that thought. Now, well, there are 3 things: creation, preservation and destruction. These 3 things, well, in Indian philosophy that is said, these 3 things are interconnected. So when things get created, things are preserved for some time, and then things are destroyed. So creation, preservation, destruction are the 3 things which are connected as if in a circle. Similarly, our birth, our existence and our death are connected, and that is what Donne wants to convey in his essay. Some critics have said that Donne's sentences are loose and well, his structure is slack, but perhaps this is needed. Repetition, we find repetition in Donne, and repetition is not always bad, as we teachers very often repeat, because repetition is a way of making you understand. Repetition is a way to persuade you, to convince you, and Donne was giving a sermon, so he had to repeat. That was the demand of the occasion. He was giving a sermon to the common people, not great intellectuals. So perhaps he deliberately used loose sentence structure, but his analogies are very clear and homely. Nothing difficult, nothing very extraordinarily scholarly, and his arguments are always associative. I wanted to show you the associative argument. As I said, that building connected with body, body connected with death, death connected with deliverance. So, well, his argument is associative, meaning one connected with the other. And thus, this small sermon, or we can call it a small essay by Donne, is an obvious proof of the great intellectual depth and clarity of the learned man that Donne was. I shall end my lecture today, this lecture, and next week I shall be coming to you again with another topic, another subject. Well, till then, let us depart, and thank you very much.